We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Hilchot Tefillin, and we are by Siman Mem Dalet. The halachot of whether or not a person is allowed to sleep with tefillin on, and it's on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph of the regular prints of Mishna Berurah. Maran writes, "Kol zman shat tefillin berosho bezroa asur lishon bahem." We started this seif learning about the fact that it's asur to go to sleep when a person has tefillin on, whether it's the tefillin of the Rosh or even just the tefillin shel yad, and that does not make a difference. Afilu shnat arai. Not only going on your bed and going to sleep, but even if you want to put your head down and sleep for 2 minutes, for 5 minutes, a temporary sleep, shnat arai, still that would be prohibited. Unless a person covers them, sudar, with a handkerchief or with something that covers the tefillin, and also it's not a case that he is with his wife. Then yashen b'hem shnat arai. A person is allowed to do shnat arai, and the way you do it is maniach rosho ben birkavo yoshev yashen. You're sitting, and you put your head in between your knees, and you go to sleep for a few minutes. If you have the tefillin in your hand that they're wrapped, it's not that tefillin is on you, but you have put on tefillin. You have rather wrapped the tefillin up, and you're holding it in your hand, then it's mutar to go to sleep, even shenat keva. It's a very interesting gezerah, that we are concerned the person that goes to sleep is going to come to pass gas with tefillin, which is asur. That's the reason for it. It's disrespectful for tefillin, and on this gezerah actually is very interesting. In Sefer Chomat Anach, he says the pasuk on Tehillim that v'adam bikar bal talin, a person with yakar bal talin should not sleep. What is considered yakar? Vikar is a reference that in that pasuk about tefillin. That's the precious thing that the person has, the gift of tefillin, carrying the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yakar, and with that you cannot go to sleep. If you do, it's like compared to an animal. If a person disrespected the tefillin. So it says, Maran Chida, when a person is with tefillin on, with the yakar, shehu levush tefillin, then bal yalin, you cannot go to sleep. Kelomar she'asur lo lishon, it's asur to go to sleep. And the reason is because you may come to pass gas, and then chas v'shalom will become like behemot nidmu. Umishlo yashen kol halayla, the person that has not gone to sleep the whole night, the Sefer Katuv L'Chaim writes that a person has to be very careful that when you are davening shaharit after Hoshana Rabbah, that you are putting on, actually Hoshana Rabbah, you're not putting on tefillin, it says, but let's say you had a night tikkun karet, or you stayed up by mishmar. Many people in yeshivot stay up the whole night and learn. You have to be careful in the morning when you are doing shaharit that you should not be falling asleep with tefillin on, because again you've been tired, and it's the chance of it is more that the person will fall asleep. So therefore you have to be still careful. Now he writes, shekevan shaya er b'meshech halayla evara ikul shelo hitkareru v'chashash ha'afacha matzui bo biyoter. Says there's more chance, I don't know how that works medically speaking, but there's more chance that it's going to come to pass gas. So therefore you have to be more vigilant, not just not to fall asleep, but also not to come to pass gas. Says the Gemara, says the Mishna Berurah, the Gazrinan Shema yavo le'aftiach bahem, but ha'anachat hasudar alein iskor sheyesh tefillin. So in other words, the obvious question is, you telling me it's asur to go to sleep when you have tefillin on even for 5 minutes, and then you say unless you put on a sudar, a blanket or a handkerchief, something on. So the obvious question is basically, what does the sudar do? let's say my tefillin shaliyat is covered anyways right now, and still is asur to go to sleep with it, even though that quote unquote there is a sudar on it. So what does that do exactly? That I put a little tefillin on it, little tzitzit rather on it, or a sudar on it. What does that do? Says the Mishna Berurah, what it accomplishes is al yedei arachat sudar is kol sheyesh tefillin alav v'lo yavo lafiach. Now, because it is a shenat ara, you're not fully falling to a deep sleep. You're going to be somewhat mindful of your actions still, and once you cover it, it's a little bit of a discomfort. That's going to act as a reminder that you should not come to past case. It says the Mishna Berurah, Yashen Bahem, that you could go to sleep shenat ara if you cover them. Velo chashiv hesach hadat. That's not considered hesach hadat. Ela kshu omed bischok vekalut rosh. Aval kshu osek b'melachto v'umunata en da'ato alehen. Mamash en ze nikra hesach hadat. Now, Mishna Berurah says a person that sleeps shenat arai is not considered hesach hadat. What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is when you wake up, you don't have to say a new bracha on your tefillin. Says the Mishna Berurah, how about if I go about my day doing different things that people do? Let's say I go to do my job and I'm busy doing things on the computer, whatever it is that a person does, and I take off my mind from tefillin. My mind is not tefillin. I could be going through the business of life for 2 hours and I'm not even thinking about tefillin. So what happens with that? Do I have to say a new bracha on tefillin because it was hesach hadat? Says the Mishna Berurah, osek bemelachto, when you're busy with your work, is not considered a hesach hadat that you would require a new bracha. En ze nikra hesach hadat, because again, your backdrop of your mind still is on tefillin. So you have a little bit connection in your mind still with it, because you constantly touch it. You make sure that it's not going out of its place and so on. Unless you're mamash completely out, that your heart is out of Yirat Hashem even. And also when a person sleeps, you forget Havlei Ha'olam b'kol makom. Mitzvah min ha'mufchar sheyeh da'ato tamid al tefillin. Mitzvah min ha'mufchar is that you should always have your mind on tefillin. So therefore, you find people that always carry with themselves when they're davening shacharit, inside their sidur, they put this laminated thing that says on it tefillin, to remind them that they're wearing tefillin and not to come to have his sachadat. If you take a look, many of the sidurim also, they have, this one doesn't have it, but many of the sidurim, they say on the top of every page, it says tefillin. Well, how much that helps, I'm not sure, because in the beginning maybe it helps, but then it becomes just the format of your page of sidurs. I'm not sure how much it helps actually, but nevertheless, that's something that a person lechatchila should be mindful to always have tefillin in their mind and be aware and mindful of the fact that they're wearing tefillin. So it says the Mishna Berurah. By the way, Kaf HaChaim brings that Ari HaKadosh and many other poskim also, it's not just the Mekubalim, they disagree with this whole thing that's not considered a sachadat unless you're doing schok v'kalut rosh. They actually hold that it's asur for a person to take their mind off of tefillin, even if they're not doing, schok v'kalut rosh, even if they're not lightheaded and they're not laughing away, still your mind has to be on tefillin all the time. And he adds also that every Baal Nefesh, every person that is careful in their conducts in other areas of life, they should be mahmir, like the stringent opinion, to always be mindful of tefillin. Again, always touch them. You always are mindful. One thing that I found someone does and it actually works is during tefillah. Again, nowadays it's much easier. But during tefillah, he had set up a small mirror in a way that he couldn't see himself to distract, but he could only see the top part of their head where the tefillin is. So when they're looking at the sidur, they actually are looking at their own tefillin and their movements, so that then if the tefillin moves a little bit, they're mindful of it right away. And also it reminds them constantly visually that they're wearing tefillin. Again, what it takes, whatever it takes for a person to do it, that's really what's needed to do the. And again, according to those who hold it's a isur of hesachadat, only when a person is lightheaded and he's laughing away, the Ben Ish Chai writes that even according to them, they would agree that during the tefillah is already considered a serious time that you have to be mindful of tefillin, and therefore you will be over on a isur if you're not careful. So for us, that we only have it one hour a day, basically during the tefillah of shaharit, a person should try to be mahmir because it's very much doable. It's not something that's out of reach. It's not something that you can't do. A person could very much be mindful of their tefillin during the course of 1 hour. It's not a very difficult task to accomplish. So last piece over here says, Shenat Arai Ben Shiurai. What's considered Shenat Arai? What's considered temporary sleep? 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Says the Mishna Berurah, there is no shiur. There's no set amount of time. So long as you fall asleep, even if it's 1 minute, that's considered Shenat Arai, and will be prohibited with tefillin unless you have one of those leniencies that the Shulchan Aruch over here brought by covering it and so on and so forth. Says the Mishna Berurah, there are those who say that the limit of Shenat Arai is the amount of time that it takes to go for a walk of Mea Ama, of 100 amot, 100 steps, let's call it, right? Which is not a whole lot, but it's about a minute, you would say. Vehu chelek samech zayin misha, says it's 67th of an hour, so a little bit less than a minute. A little bit less than a minute. If you fall asleep for that much time, that's already considered Shenat Keva. What's the difference? Why do you have to say this? Because if a person is dozing off, right, it's a little tired, so dozing off a little bit, for a few seconds at a time, it happens when a person is very tired in the morning, he woke up, he's just getting adjusted, and sleep. It happens the first week of sleep, actually a lot. Is that asur? Does that mean I have to take off my tefillin and daven without a tefillin? No, that's fine. That's not considered Shenat Arai. Like, you kind of doze off a second or two or five. That's fine, as long as it's less than 67th of an hour, which is again a little bit less than a minute. So it says, that's what the Gaon Paskins and so on. Interestingly, the Ben Ish Chai seems to also say that it's mutar to sleep with tefillin, Shenat Arai, right? Until the amount of 67th of a minute of an hour. That Ben Ish Chai seems to indicate that it's mutar to sleep that much. Now, how are you going to measure that exactly? I'm not sure. But again, in my mind, the big nafkamina is what I mentioned. That when a person dozes off, he's very tired, and every few seconds you catch yourself, in a way that of course, in a way that your tefillah is proper, but it's not an isur that you have to take off your tefillin. In those cases, you better be pacing back and forth, walking, not falling asleep. But again, nevertheless, it would be mutar. And he explains that even though that when a person is sleeping for those few seconds, you're not thinking of tefillin, and we said that you have to be mindful of tefillin. He says, Mikol Makom, it's not really, you're not over, you're not transgressing isur of Hesachat, because you're not thinking of other things either. So Ben Ish Chai has a chidush. This is a massive chidush. He says, if your mind is blank, that's not the isur of Hesachadat. Hesachadat means you're thinking of other things. So when you doze off, you're not thinking of anything. You just fall asleep. And then you catch yourself, you're then mindful of tefillin. That is not an isur of Hesachadat, says the Ben Ish Chai, but Kaf HaChaim writes that even if your mind is blank, basically, because you are sleeping even few seconds, the Ben Ish Chai says, the Kaf HaChaim rather says, even those few seconds is asur, so therefore he does not agree necessarily with the kula, the leniency of the Ben Ish Chai, but for the reason of Hesach Hadat, because he holds that that's considered Hesach Hadat. So therefore, it comes out an interesting machloket Ben Ish Chai and Kaf HaChaim, that Kaf HaChaim holds if your mind is on nothing, you're just nothing. That is also Hesach Hadat because you're not thinking actively of tefillin, but the Ben Ish Chai seems to hold that you don't have to every second be thinking of tefillin. You just have to be careful not to start thinking about other things of business and what type of chelo kebab you're going to have tonight and those things are not mutar, business deals and so on and so forth. That is really the problem, says the Ben Ish Chai.
Let's say like you're coming here to daven in the morning, and in the middle of davening, let's say someone outside can tell that you will help them bring a table up or something. Not Shema Esrei, but just a little bit of like, davening. You're taking your mind off the film. You have to take it off to go downstairs to help that person and put it back on after.
Well, if a person could be mindful of tefillin and you're not putting the burden, the masoi on your tefillin, it's not pressing on the tefillin, that's mutar.
Well, not pressing on the tefillin, but like you're taking your mind off of it because you're going to do something else. Your mind is now somewhere else.
Well, for 2 minutes you could keep your mind on it. If you can't, so that's a different story. But again, if you make a mental note that I'm going to be mindful of my tefillin in the 2 minutes that I'm going to be helping out.
Say like I'm going to be mindful in the next 2 minutes I'm going. But when you go help, your mind now goes on something else for sure. You're helping. Right, your mind does go on something. Very minimum.
You're a very focused person. I appreciate that.
Like it does, right?
Yeah, well, you could keep your mind on the feeling as well. You could, technically speaking, and be mindful of it. But again, yeah, that's basically what the Mishna Berurah said before. You don't have to take it off. And they had in the time of Chazal, they would go out and about to do their job. Sometimes your mind is not fully on feeling, and still. No, but it's a midat chasidut. The person should keep their mind on the tefillin. Now let's start now the next siman memhei din tefillin bebet hakvarot ubebet hamerchas. How about entering with your tefillin in Bet HaChaim? You're going to visit the cemetery. Can you go with the tefillin in the cemetery? Can you enter the cemetery with the tefillin, which now is going to have other ramifications halachically as well, and also what about Bet HaMerchas? Can you go into a bathhouse with the tefillin on or not? If you could just make that thing, that would be much better. They're going to be covered. Says the Shulchan Aruch, asur nichnos bebet hakvarot o betoch 400 shel met utfilin berosho. A person cannot enter the Bet HaKvarot, or even for that matter, the vicinity of a corpse. If a person is within 6 feet away from a corpse, from a dead body, you cannot have tefillin on. Why is that? Says the Shulchan Aruch, Mishum lo'eg larash cheref oseu. Because of the pasuk that Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei, in Perek Yud Zayin, that you are mocking, if you consider mocking a poor person, a person that passed away, kevan shemet adam lametim chofshi, kevan shemet adam naasa chofshi min mitzvot. He becomes chofshi from the mitzvot. He becomes basically free from the mitzvot in a way that he can't. Unfortunately, he can't do mitzvot anymore. And if you are next to a deceased person, or their kever, which again, their neshama still is very much connected with it, and then you are flaunting, so to speak, your ability to do the mitzvot by your tzitziot being out and dragging, or your tefillin being on you, and so on. It's as if you're saying, look, I could do mitzvot, you cannot do mitzvot. That is considered out of character for a sensitive soul, for a Jewish person, for a Jewish individual that wants to be mindful of other people and their feelings, even though that we're talking about dead people here, talking about neshamot of dead people. So therefore, it's the Gemara says it's asur to do that, and Shulchan Aruch, Rambam all paskin this as well. This is the Gemara we recently had in Daf Yud Chet in Masechet Brachot on Amud Aleph, and it is the halacha that's brought in Shulchan Aruch as well. Says the Mishna Berurah, ואפילו תוך 400 של מקום התחלת הקברים, גם כן אסור. Not just that you cannot enter inside Bet HaKevarot, but even if it's outside the Bet HaKevarot, but you're within the 4 amot of a kever, within 6 feet from a kever, still is asur. Unless you have a mechitza. Unless you have a mechitza that comes up and divides between you and the kever, then of course that would be mutar because it's a different reshut. ערב ביחד ויאמר אסור ללך תוך 400 של קבר או של מת. מגן אברהם says, זה בא לרמז, במקום בית הקברות ולפנים אסור, אפילו רחוק 400 מן הקבר. There is a massive chidush of the Magen Avraham. Magen Avraham says, why doesn't the Shulchan Aruch say an easy language? An easy language would be, it's asur to enter within 4 amot of beit hakvarot or a kever or a deceased, right? Instead of saying, because again, we just said it's even asur to be outside beit hakvarot if you are within 4 amot of a kever. So instead of saying this, like turning the food like this to eat it, just say a simple language, says Magen Avraham. Why couldn't the Shulchan Aruch just say it's asur to enter within the 4 amot of a deceased body or a kever? Just say it like that. Who cares about Bet HaKevarot? You just told me that even outside Bet HaKevarot, it's asur if you're within the 6 feet of a kever. So just say it like that. That should be the ikar. Say it's asur to enter the vicinity of a dead body or a kever. What's the vicinity of 6 feet? 4 amot. Says the Magen Avraham, you know why the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say it like that? Says the Magen Avraham, because it's asur to enter a Bet HaKvarot even if you're outside the 4 amot of a kever. The official premises of a Bet HaKvarot you cannot enter with the tefillin, even though that you're away more than 4 amot from a kever. This is what the Magen Avraham says based on this language of Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mishna Berurah, there are those who don't agree with the assertion of Magen Avraham and say, no, Bet HaKvarot is not lo egrerash, because I entered the Bet HaKvarot, I'm mocking the dead. They have their vicinity. Their vicinity is 4 amot. Even in the Machanech HaKadosh that we're just learning in the Gemara now, Machanech HaKadosh is 4 amot around me. A person conquers their 4 amot around them. That's their Machanech. So a deceased person doesn't get more than a living person. So if you're outside the 4 amot, is mutar. So what that you're on the premises of a Bet HaKvarot. So there are those who disagree with this assertion of Magen Avraham. Sorry, what? The Tumah is mutar. Again, if you're not with, if you're not within the 4 amot, it's not katame. No, a kohen could enter. Well, of course, we have mentioned there are unfortunately cemeteries, and again, every chance that I get to speak about this, I do. There are unfortunately cemeteries that are owned by non-Jewish companies, and they are not run basically based on halakha. Some of which are very, very popular in our community. Leave it to your imagination. And the problem could start from very small things, even as small as having a tree that is, spreading its wings, its branches over the kever, and the other end of it is over the road. And many Kohanim say, well, I'm going to stay away from the kever 4 amot, but they don't realize that if you pass by that place, then you're by connection under ohel of a kever, and then you become tameh, which is a problem. Bezrat Hashem, we will continue this in the days to come. Chazak u'baruch. Rabbi Hananiah ben Arashah אומר, רצה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות את ישראל, לפיכך הרבה להם תורה